All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 12th, 2025, about 7 p.m. where I'm at right now, and we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series with episode 18 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Haywood Hall, this great man right here, this handsome black man right here, who I believe was me in a previous lifetime, because there are so many similarities in his life that I'm seeing in my own. And this is a fabulous book that is well over 700 pages, making it easily the longest book that we've tried to tackle in this Book to React series, where we read entire text cover to cover on live stream with the people, interacting with the chat, challenging the text, being challenged ourselves, and learning and growing for the people, which is why we do these live streams. I'll never stop doing these because this is actually a great opportunity for me to force myself to make time during the day to actually open up a book and read it, and hopefully share some information in game with y'all. Now, if you want to get this book yourself, if you don't like my reading style, go to libcom.org, scroll down right here, but if you really want that hardcover of it, just go to Amazon and get that hardcover right here for $6. No, sorry, 651 pounds, sir. Good sir, you can get it in hardcover. The paperback is sold out. We started this live stream and maybe somebody came across my channel and saw that this book was out there and bought it for themselves. So shout out to them. And yeah, let me know what y'all think of this reading as we continue this wonderful book right here. And yeah, in our last reading, we finished chapter 15, Sharecroppers with Guns, Organizing the Black Belt, where Haywood was put in charge of organizing the Communist Party. I believe it was in Memphis, and all the struggles that he went through in that time. And now we're going into chapter 16, Preparing for Battle, 8th Convention of the CPUSA. So, as you all know, if you've been following my reading, I'm not a big fan of the infighting of the Communist Party, the political machinations, the moving and shaking behind closed doors, but nevertheless, we will challenge ourselves by reading this chapter, which I think it will be about the fight against Browderism, revisionism in the Communist Party. Without further ado, we're going to get to it, knock out chapter 16, and then call it a day. So, Preparing for Battle, 8th Convention of the CPUSA. The 8th Convention of the CPUSA was held in Cleveland, Ohio, April 2nd through the 8th, 1934. It convened in a world situation of rising fascism and growing threat of war. Sounds very similar to the world that we live in right now. Hitler had come to power in Germany the year before and had embarked on a campaign of imperialist aggression. He had promoted a fascist coup in Austria and had reoccupied the Rhineland. In Asia, his Japanese imperial allies had overrun northeast China as a first step toward establishing their Asian co-prosperity sphere, which envisioned the conquest of Asia and the Pacific. Mussolini was planning the invasion of Ethiopia, which took place the following year. At home, the economic crisis had passed its lowest ebb in 1933 and had now leveled off into a deep-going depression. There was no recovery in sight as a high rate of unemployment persisted. It was becoming clear that Roosevelt's New Deal and the National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA, were attempts to bridge the most difficult period for the monopoly capitalists and begin the restoration of their profits. This was indicated in the enormous bounties being poured out by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the ruinous effects of inflation and price fixing in reducing the workers' real wages. Workers, however, were fighting back in an unprecedented display of militancy and solidarity involving whites, blacks, women, youth, skilled and unskilled workers, native and foreign-born. A strike wave had engulfed the entire nation, with over 1 million workers on strike in 1934, the biggest mass upheaval of workers in the history of the country. I arrived in Cleveland several days early and stopped at the Black YMCA and on Euclid Avenue. I spent these days putting the finishing touches on my report on the party's Afro-American work. As head of the CP's Negro Department, it was my responsibility to present such a report for the 8th Convention. Before I arrived in Cleveland, I had attended the convention of District 16 in Birmingham, Alabama. District conventions were held throughout the country in the few weeks before the national gathering. These meetings summed up the pre-convention discussion, which had begun 6 months earlier with the publication of the draft resolution on the work and tasks of the party. The draft was discussed at all levels, shop and street units, and sections. Amendments were formulated and disagreements argued out. Delegates to the 8th Convention were also elected at the district meetings. I arrived promptly on Monday morning, April 2nd, at the Prospect Avenue Auditorium, where the convention was to be held. The auditorium was located in a once proud but now crisis-stricken residential neighborhood. Delegates from all parts of the country were arriving. After registering, I began circulating among them. The composition of the delegates was impressive. There were a number of older party veterans whose faces I already knew, but the majority seemed relatively young, rank-and-file leaders fresh from the struggles. They appeared expectant and eager, self-confidently girding for a new push towards the revolutionary goals outlined in the draft resolution. They were gathered in groups, exchanging experiences. Among the 233 regular delegates were a significant percentage of blacks, 39 altogether. In my position as head of the Negro department, I had become acquainted with a great number of the party's black cadre, or I had at least known of their work. But it was heartening to see so many new faces among them. I was particularly happy to see the delegation of sharecroppers from Tallapoosa County. Their spokesman appeared to be Eula Gray, the niece of Ralph Gray, the sharecropper who had been killed at the Camp Hill shootout. I believe I had met her at the home of Tom Gray the summer before. She was a lively and attractive young woman with big, bright eyes. Later in the convention, she was to give a rousing report to the delegates on the activities of the Tallapoosa County Young Communist League. Describing the work of the youth cadres, she stated that the youth made up 2,000 or 6,000 members of the Sharecroppers Union. As she ended her speech, she led the delegates in singing a revolutionary version of the old spiritual, "We Shall Not Be Moved." Lenin is our teacher, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. Okay, that's not a bop. I remember in chapters 1, 2, and 3, Harry was hitting us with bops. That one is not a bop. No offense. That's not a hit. That's not a slapper. Al Murphy, secretary of the Sharecroppers Union, was also present. As usual, he maintained a low profile, pushing the local leaders to the fore. There were also delegates from the fraternal parties of Cuba, Mexico, and Canada, among others. To my surprise and pleasure, I saw among them my old Lenin School classmate, the Irishman Sean Murray. He had come to the U.S. to bring greetings from the recently organized Irish Communist Party, of which he was a general secretary, and to tour the country to rally support for a united, independent Ireland. Langston Hughes, an important figure in the Black Renaissance of the 20s, had recently returned from a year's stay in the Soviet Union. He composed a poem, "Put One More S in the USA," especially for the convention. The convention opened with a gigantic mass rally on the night of April 2nd. The main hall of the auditorium was packed with delegates and visitors. Among the speakers were Robert Minor, Max Bedacht, James Ford, and Clarence Hathaway. Bill Foster, the party chairman, was unable to attend since he had not fully recovered from a heart attack suffered in the 1932 election campaign. He sent a message which was read and greeted with thunderous applause, as was the draft reply, which wished him a speedy recovery and quick return to the front lines of the battle. The meeting adopted a manifesto calling upon the workers to take the revolutionary way out of the crisis in the fights for bread and work and against war and fascism. The business sessions opened on the morning of April 3rd with the election of a presiding committee. The stage was dominated by the backdrop of a mural showing a mighty worker's arm wielding the axe of the united class struggle, bursting the chains of capitalist oppression. Hard. Cheers and a standing ovation greeted the nomination of honorary members of the Presidium, among whom were Joseph Stalin, Ernst Thälmann, German leader imprisoned by the Nazis, and Georgy Dimitrov, the hero of the Reichstag trial. He had exposed the flimsy frame-up of the Nazi criminals, and his release had been forced by international protest. The mood of the delegates was enthusiastic, eager, expectant, and determined. We felt that the country teetered on the edge of a revolutionary upsurge, on the eve of historic revolutionary struggles. Thus, we prepared for battle. The main task of the convention was mapping out a strategy to win the masses to the revolutionary way out of the crisis. Browder, the party's general secretary, stepped forth. How this task was to be accomplished was the central thrust of his 5-hour report, frequently interrupted by applause. In a dramatic analysis of the world and domestic situation, Browder stated, "Our task is to win the majority of the working class to our program. We do not have unlimited time to accomplish this goal. Tempo, speed of development of our work becomes the decisive factor in determining victory or defeat. For fascism is rearing its ugly head more boldly every day." These words still ring true today in 2025 if you're living in the United States of America, or if you're out here in Hungary, where I'm at right now. Taking the line of the 13th plenum of the ECCI, he said, "The world stands on the brink of revolution and wars. Even the United States, still the strongest fortress of world capitalism, has been stripped of its last shred of exceptionalism and stands fully exposed to the fury of the storms of crisis." He went on to expose the first phase of Roosevelt's New Deal program. Roosevelt promises to feed the hungry by reducing the production of food. He promises to redistribute wealth by billions in subsidies to the banks and corporations. He gives to the forgotten man by speeding up the process of monopoly and trustification. He would increase purchasing power of the masses through inflation, which gives them $1 worth only 60 cents. He restores the faith of the masses in democracy by beginning the introduction of fascism. Is he talking about Trump? Is he talking about Trump? I don't know, man. The more things change. After recording the party's substantive gains since the last convention, Browder went on to list its immediate tasks in the current period. He called for an extension of the United Front from below, with its only condition being unity in struggle and a fusion for the fight for immediate partial demands with the revolutionary fight for the overthrow of capitalism. In line with this task, he urged a sharpened attack against the AFL bureaucracy, the Socialist Party, and all reformist and renegade groups. On the black struggle, Browder called for strengthening the party's work among blacks in basic industry: steel, coal, packing houses, and marine. The black worker should be organized into revolutionary trade unions around issues of job discrimination and democratic trade union rights. He urged an accelerated fight against lynching and for the freedom of the Scottsboro Boys and Angelo Herndon. In addition, it was the job of the party to raise the slogan of equal rights and for the right of self-determination in the Black Belt, which is still dope. Imagine a white man, the Communist Party. The Communist Party back then was so radical. A white man stood in front of a crowd of hundreds of people and said black people have the right to have their own nation in the United States of America. Black people have the right to their own. This is the thing. Even though I'm not sold on the nationalism, you can't escape that message being so radical and so moving and so motivating, so blood pumping. You feel me? That's insane, because you have white people today that would swear up and down that racism has not existed since the last slave got free. Continuing. But these tasks could only be fulfilled, Browder asserted, with an uncompromising fight against the main danger, white chauvinism. It was also necessary to fight against petty bourgeoisie nationalistic tendencies among blacks. Also, I'm just going to make this clear. For anybody out there, white chauvinism is just what we call today white supremacy or white supremacist thinking, essentially. White chauvinism is a useful term. Maybe we should incorporate it and use it. But I think also white supremacist thinking is still equally as valid. I'm going to continue here. At the close of his speech, Browder called for a party rooted among the workers and toiling farmers. Once Browder had outlined the general priorities regarding the black struggle, it was my job, as reporter for the Central Committee on the question, to elaborate in detail and clear up some of the confusion around black reformism and petty bourgeois nationalism. This was particularly important because for the first time in the party's history, we had to fight a significant petty bourgeois nationalist deviation which was surfacing within our own ranks. The general revolutionary perspective outlined by Browder on the Afro-American question meant a sharpened clash with the forces of black reformism in both its assimilationist and nationalist forms. This reformist ideology was the main obstacle in the road to achieving the hegemony of black workers in the liberation struggle. It was now a we or they situation, I maintained. My assessment of this situation came out of the party's experience in its 3-year struggle to free the Scottsboro Boys. Scottsboro represented our first serious challenge to recognize black reformist leadership. The activities of the reformist leaders had increased in direct proportion to the increase of our revolutionary influence among the masses. The party's strategy at the time was to wrest hegemony from the reformists and win the leadership of black workers in the Black Freedom Front. The black proletariat, led by its communist vanguard, was then, and remains today, the only class that can unite the broad masses of black people. And when he says the black proletariat, he's referring to what we now call today the black grassroots. The black grassroots, people that are not, high earners, not highly educated, not, those with the most amount of access or influence, but influence is not the right word because the black grassroots is highly influential. All of American culture comes from the black grassroots, or as Harry Haywood calls, the black proletariat. And the argument he's making here is that the black masses are the only group that can provide people the guide, the pathway to give the freedom struggle a consistently anti-imperialist content and character, thus building its alliance with the working class as a whole. Very revolutionary. So, in order to carry out this strategy, it was important for us to understand that the attitude of the black bourgeoisie toward imperialism is not uniform. On the one hand, there is a capitulatory, compromising, and in this country, assimilationist trend, and on the other, a nationalist, sort of ghetto bourgeois tendency. The main social base of this latter trend is among the ghetto petty bourgeoisie. Say that three times fast. Ghetto petty bourgeoisie, small businessmen, the intelligentsia, ministers, professionals, and the like, who are the most outspoken representatives of bourgeois nationalist movements. Both trends are in essence reformist, as they seek a solution to the question within the framework of the existing imperialist-dominated social structure. Basically what he's trying to say, within every group of people, you have a certain class, and they're the bourgeoisie, which are the bourgeoisie in Marxist theory are the owners of the means of production, the people that have the money to give you a job, right? Then you have the petty bourgeoisie, who are people who will have, more standing in the capitalist system. These are, the lawyers, doctors, managers, supervisors, executives at companies, et cetera, right? These are the people that usually lead revolutionary movements. When we think about any sort of nationalist movement for freedom or the right to self-determination, usually the people that are leading those are the intelligentsia, the middle class, the people who don't control society right now, but have gained some benefits from that society, right? And so what he's saying here is that for black people, it makes no difference. It makes no difference compared to like the other groups of people that had their freedom struggles and their nationalist movements. Within black people, we have the same tendencies. We have the intelligentsia, the ministers, the small business people, who all are saying that they want to advocate for rights and freedom for their people, but really it just means they want to be able to dominate and rule over their people the way the capitalists rule over them. Continuing here. Permit me a brief digression to describe the disposition of class forces in the black community as they existed at the time. I would say here that my analysis benefits somewhat from hindsight. In 1934, the dominant tendency of black reformism was bourgeois assimilationism, reflecting the strivings and ambitions of the top layers of what Du Bois called the talented tenth. These elites were wealthy professionals, a sprinkling of successful businessmen, top echelon leaders, upper bracket educators, local politicians, and the like. Centered in the top leadership of the NAACP, Urban League, and associate organizations, their orientation for progress was via acceptance into the white world. They saw the solution through a slow evolutionary process under the benevolent auspices of enlightened imperialism and its liberal detachment. Supporters of this trend tend to be staunchly anti-nationalist and can only see advancement for blacks through aping the white establishment. Is he talking about anything different than today? Jesus Christ, it's still the same. is still the same. We still have wealthy white bourgeois blacks who, have all these high-level jobs and access and money, and they say that they speak for the black masses. The influence of the top assimilationist group within the black movement derived not from its economic strength, but from its control of the main media of mass influence in the black community, the press and administration of educational and cultural institutions. It has strings extending into the top leadership of the whole complex of black life on all its levels: ministerial alliances, professional and fraternal organizations, women's clubs, and the like. They received heavy support in the columns and editorials of the big capitalist press and were the main dispensers of whites' ruling class patronage. In 1940, Du Bois criticized the NAACP leadership because it regarded the organization as a weapon to attack the sort of social discrimination that especially irks them, rather than as an organization to improve the status and power of the whole Negro group. Basically, what he's trying to say, W.B. Du Bois said that NAACP leadership is just trying to get rid of being called the N-word instead of actually trying to liberate fully black people from the shackles of white supremacy, white chauvinism, and capitalism. I pointed out in my report that they believe the fate of the Negro masses is bound up with the maintenance of capitalism. This view, of course, implies the collaboration with the white imperialist rulers, or in the words of the NAACP leaders, united front of the best elements of both races. This type of front could only be built in opposition to the rising movement of Negro and white toilers, particularly against its leaders, the communists. Indeed, it was the white liberal elements within the U.S. bourgeois who launched the NAACP in 1911, and thenceforward held veto power over all its decisions. They intervened in the movement when the Booker T. Washington Tuskegee machine was under heavy fire from the Young Turks of the Niagara movement, led by W.B. Du Bois and Monroe Trotter. Big business, alerted to the danger to sane leadership, represented by an uncontrolled black movement, rushed forces to the danger spot. The young intellectuals of the Niagara movement were overwhelmed with new imperialist pleaders for its cause. They were subject to sustained wooing by humanitarian millionaires, backed up by hard cash in the form of subsidies to black education, health, and religious projects. Wealthy white liberal philanthropists like Joel Spingarn and Mary White Ovington held decisive positions of leadership in the organization. Its circle of supporters included millionaires like Mrs. Cyrus McCormick and Harvey Firestone. As Ralph Bunche aptly observed, the NAACP, propelled by dominant white hands, embarked upon the civil libertarian course that the Negro-inspired Niagara movement had futilely tried to navigate. So basically, you know how people said Black Lives Matter, the organization, was bought out by rich, white, elite liberals, and basically the movement got watered down and fed full of like stuff that, you know, the black grassroots supposedly, and I disagree with this, disagrees with, like feminism and gay rights and things like that. You know, when people were saying that about the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Which some of it is founded, but a lot of it is unfounded, and it's more convoluted. Basically, he's saying the same thing about the NAACP. The NAACP was birthed from, you know, one organization that was then essentially wooed and swayed and bought out by rich white capitalists who were just trying to morph these Negro reformers into basically replicas of themselves in black. Trying to have them not really try to tear down the system, but say slowly but surely, if we keep on giving you money and fund your churches, your schools, and education, maybe you can be like us, except eventually, right? So, yeah, continuing here. The leadership of the NAACP is a self-perpetuating one with ties directly to Wall Street and social democrats like A. Philip Randolph, as well as in more recent years to trade union bureaucrats. The assimilationist stratum has not ceased to offer opposition on domestic issues, nor has it surrendered its claims to speak for blacks. But it is its support for monopoly capitalism and belief in the possibility of peaceful, legal, full integration into the system that determines the boundaries and character of its opposition. This is the core of Negro bourgeoisie reformism. From this flows its tactical line of reliance on bourgeois courts, legislative bodies, its treacherous compromises with the white ruling class, its reactionary sabotage of the revolutionary struggles for Negro rights. The bourgeoisie nationalist tendency had its economic roots in the objective position of the black bourgeoisie and its peculiar conditions of a stunted development within the structure of monopoly capitalism. Confronted by overwhelming competition, black business was marginal and non-industrial in character, mainly retail and service industries. Even here, it was restricted to the leftovers of the big capitalist chains, enterprises, and economically sounder white establishments. As a result of this peculiar position, the black ghetto bourgeoisie, mainly a petty bourgeoisie, found itself caught in an inescapable bind. On the one hand, it had what has been called a vested interest in segregation, upon which it was economically dependent for its market. At the same time, it found segregation the chief obstacle to its social development. It was torn between its immediate economic interest, which dictated maintenance of the ghetto as its main base of operation, and its desire for social equality. The result was a split personality created by mutually exclusive desires. Basically, what he's trying to say here is like, listen, the rich black folk at the time were the ones who were leading the NAACP. And these people were a petty bourgeoisie who owned, the local restaurants, they ran the police force, they ran the local Negro hospital, et cetera, et cetera. So they were dependent economically upon segregation because, as we know, there's a lot of people now who reminisce and say integration was a mistake. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake. We should have kept segregation. Segregation was a good thing for black people because we had black businesses and black jobs and black bosses and all black communities. We had Black Wall Street. It was Wakanda, apparently, to some people during segregation. But as Harry Haywood points out, the people that were leading the movement against segregation in the black bourgeoisie were also conflicted because they were trying to fight racism and end segregation, but they needed segregation for their economic benefit, causing a real conflict, right? Showing that they could not truly be a revolutionary force for total black liberation and overthrowing capitalism. Going to continue here. As I wrote in Negro Liberation in 1948, the Negro upper class came late to the scene of American economic development, when the key points of the country's economic life were already dominated by big business. Its leaders sought to rally the masses through appeals to race solidarity, cooperation, and loyalty for a buy black policy. They attempted thereby to foster a kind of black exclusivism, which would objectively run parallel to the segregationist policy of the white power elite. The less affluent sections of the petty bourgeoisie act as the most aggressive spokesmen of this type of bourgeois nationalism. The militancy of this stratum is very misleading and in fact posed a real danger to the party at the time. I felt it most important to point this out to the delegates. While apparently voicing opposition to the official bourgeoisie reformist leadership, these petty bourgeois nationalist leaders objectively represent the interest of the bourgeoisie. Therefore, objectively, these movements reflect an attempt on the part of the petty bourgeoisie leaders to seize the leadership of the rising movement of the Negro masses against oppression in order to throttle it by diverting it into reactionary utopian channels, away from revolutionary struggle and hence back into the fold of the bourgeois reformist. This self-isolationist tendency has been expressed in a plethora of projects for building a black economy within the walls of segregation. In times of relative prosperity, this tendency existed side by side with the dominant assimilationist trend as a more or less steady undercurrent. But in hard times of economic depression, this stratum, as a result of its weak and tenuous economic position, is forced to the wall of bankruptcy. As the economic conditions of the ghetto masses upon which they depend deteriorate, their strivings are blocked. Sections of them, driven to despair, frequently fall under the influence of utopian and messianic leaders who raise the banner of race solidarity and develop mass movements of a separatist character. Such was the case of Marcus Garvey's movement and others which followed World War I. The growth of Garveyism came as a result of the crisis of black reformism when organizations like the NAACP found themselves without a program to meet the needs of the masses. The end of the post-war economic crisis was followed by a period of partial capitalist stabilization and relative prosperity in the latter half of the 20s. This witnessed the decline of the Garvey movement and the comeback of the NAACP to the leadership scene. But his hegemony was only short-lived. The crisis of 1929 found the old guard again in crisis. Again, there was an upsurge of separatist trends, expressing the desperation of the ghetto nationalist. Again, there was a breakaway of the middle strata, which comprised its rank and file and lower echelon leaders. By the mid-30s, these defections had reached into the top echelons of the organization, resulting in the resignation of Dr. Du Bois from the NAACP. Unfortunately, his defection was not to the rising revolutionary forces, but rather toward petty bourgeoisie nationalism. By the 50s, however, Du Bois had been won to proletarian revolution and was a firm supporter of socialism. So basically, what he's saying here is that the NAACP and these other bourgeois organizations that were supposed to lead the black masses by being led by rich black capitalists, right? As they continue to suffer at the hands of white supremacy and white economic dominance, where if America gets the flu, if America gets a cold, black people get the flu, for example. So these rich bourgeoisie black people were suffering economically, and they're not able to lead these organizations, and they don't have a real path forward. They just go with the wind, and so then they start losing people. The people that are following them start breaking away. First, it starts with the lower strata, then it goes up, and then it even moves to the top echelons, where even a founder of the NAACP like W.B. Du Bois leaves the organization and doesn't even find it to be motivating or uplifting or revolutionary. Continuing here. But this time, a new force had entered the arena of the liberation struggle. Since the Garvey movement, a black working class had emerged as an independent class force. Its advanced detachment, including many former Garvey militants, was the Communist Party, with a revolutionary program and strategy for black liberation. It furnished the leadership for a new national revolutionary trend. It was primarily because of the rapid growth of this new force that the ghetto nationalist wave, which swept the black communities in the early 30s, did not coalesce into a single organization with a unified program and a national center, as did the Garvey movement in the post-war decade. This time, it was manifested in a series of mainly local-based movements. The main theme of my report was the call for a stepped-up ideological struggle against bourgeois reformism and its reactionary programs and policies in the current crisis. I called attention to the treacherous activities of the NAACP and Urban League leadership, which had greeted the New Deal as virtually another emancipation proclamation. I pointed out that the clear-cut bourgeois reformist movements, such as the NAACP and the National Urban League, with their openly declared policies of collaboration with the white ruling class, were not the main danger. To a large extent, they had already lost the confidence of the masses. Our immediate problem lay in the new neo-Garveyist movements, which were spreading like brush fire through the black communities. These appealed to the nationalist mood among the masses and advocated the wildest reactionary schemes as a way out of the misery and suffering of the ghetto masses. I did not expect this while reading this chapter, but almost every single sentence in chapter 16, a chapter that I literally avoided for a day. I literally avoided reading this chapter for a day because I thought it was going to be boring as hell. This is probably the most pertinent, the most relevant, the most important chapter in the book, at least from my perspective, because everything he's talking about here still relates today. Still relates today. We have these people, all over the internet and all in black discourse who essentially miss the main point, that we have an issue in the black community that is no different than what is in the white community, which is dealing with exploitation from capitalism. We have a specific set of circumstances that we're dealing with when it comes to that. Thank you, dear. Because we're living under anti-black racism in this white supremacist world. But instead of focusing on the exploitation caused by capitalism and everything that springs forth from that, We have people that say we just need to go back to Africa, or we need to just separate in America. We need to bring back segregation. We need strong black men in the household. We need to get rid of all the LGBTQIA plus stuff related to the black freedom struggle, et cetera, et cetera. Just reactionary bullshit keeps popping up. This and everything he's talking about in 1930 is still very relevant today. You hear this same sort of discourse today. You get what I'm saying? Very interesting stuff here. You have to take a swig of this tea before I blow a blood vessel. I don't know what that is. That's good. Get married, fellas. Get married. Cheers. Continuing here. I briefly analyzed some of these movements against which we would have to direct our fire in the coming period. I noted 3 types of such movements. For example, the nationalist movement for the establishment of a 49th state headquartered in Chicago. The leaders of this organization held that black oppression and racism in this country were natural and inevitable. Therefore, they proposed that the federal government acquire a territory from the existing states, adequate in size and fertile in soil, and dispose of this land, its resources, to Negroes willing to settle. This defeatist scheme, according to its advocates, would not only solve the problem, but, we were informed, will do much to relieve the economic stress throughout the country due to the vast oversupply of workers who can't find work. That's crazy. That's crazy and that's reactionary. That's just flat out stupid. Let's give, number one, who wants to live in the Midwest? If black people did have our own country, we cannot have it be in the Midwest. Flat land, fat hogs, bad skin pogs, the Great Lakes, snowy winters of 11 feet high mounds of snow burying your car. No, the black nation cannot be in the Midwest under no circumstances, under 0 circumstances. All right, continuing here. Another movement of this type, also originated in Chicago, was the peace movement to Liberia. The leaders of this organization claimed 4 million members who had signed a petition addressed to the president, asking that the government pay the expense of blacks' transportation to Liberia or Ethiopia to settle. The signers of the petition, according to the leaders, stated that they hold themselves in readiness to be eliminated from the impossibly competitive labor market here by transportation and government transports to Africa. Further, they stated an exodus of the poorest people would benefit both races, improve labor conditions for those remaining, and promote the long-deferred economic recovery. Emphasizing the peaceful, non-revolutionary character of the movement, its utter subservience to imperialism, its advocates asserted that their scheme entailed no complication with foreign imperialist powers, and they were not out to set up an independent state, but to become law-abiding citizens in their newly adopted countries. How can they talk out of both sides of their neck? We're not having imperialist intentions, but let's go to the colony that America created in Africa. What? How do people even come to that sort of logic? I don't get it. It was clear that these schemes fit precisely into the whole program of the most racist and reactionary elements, such as the infamous Senator Bilbo of Mississippi. We can basically what he's saying here is like these communists had the same ideas as the governor of Mississippi, undoubtedly. Like there's like 3 positions in America you hold to be the most racist person. Governor of Mississippi is definitely in that top 3. Like governor of Mississippi, inherently, you automatically become a grand wizard of the KKK. Automatically. Still, even in 2025. Continuing here. We consider that perhaps the most dangerous of these movements was the so-called Jobs for Negroes movement. It cropped up in many different cities under different names. In Harlem, it was called the Sufi movement and was led by the notorious Abdul Hamid Sufi in Baltimore. It appeared as the Costini movement in Washington, D.C. It was the Negro Alliance. The local nationalist leaders, and very often these leaders saw the movement as a remunerative hustle, all followed a similar plan. Is he talking about Dr. Umar and Tariq Nasheed? That's what I'm saying. Like, I did not expect this chapter to be this entertaining and this relevant. This is very dope. Because, come on, man. Like, the jokes write themselves. I don't even have to fill in the blanks here. If you know, you know. All right. They focused their struggle for more jobs on the small white-owned businesses and shops which refused to hire blacks. The policy of a small firms excluding blacks from employment while selling product in the ghetto created a great deal of danger and animosity among blacks. The Jobs for Negroes movement thrived on this justly felt anger. But by directing the struggle exclusively against these small establishments, which had only a small fraction of jobs, and broad struggle of black unemployed, and was diverted away from the large corporations which were located mostly outside the ghetto. These movements tended to quickly become anti-white, seeing the enemy as the white worker who held jobs in the ghetto. Demands such as all jobs for blacks in Harlem were common. The ruling class was overjoyed with this type of movement. It did not attack the real enemy nor raise demands for jobs. Equality and the end to discrimination, where the main masses of blacks worked and where the majority of the jobs were. Instead, they sought to divert the struggle for jobs from the real enemy to white workers and aggravated racial divisions precisely at a time when conditions and potential for a united struggle were very great. Does that sound very similar to the FBA movement and people saying we need to kick the immigrants out because black people can't even get a job now at McDonald's? Or black people used to be the ones working out in the fields, so let's kick the immigrants out because we want to go back to the fields and work for the descendants of the rich white capitalists that bought us and brought us in the first place. You get what I'm saying? It's crazy. But this chapter is so relevant. These pages are leaping out to me. Even more sinister was the Pacific movement for the Eastern world. It had its main slogan, United Front of Darker Races, under the leadership of Japan. Okay, this is just getting insane. The movement developed directly in connection with the threat of war between the U.S. and Japan, and was basically the work of the Japanese imperialist agents who were attempting to divert the growing national liberation movement of blacks into support for Japanese imperialism. Its program for race unity, as opposed to working class unity, and the unity of all toilers against imperialism, found support among some sections of black petty bourgeoisie intellectuals and even some workers. This movement was particularly poisonous because of the racial and chauvinistic propaganda, attempting to convince blacks that Japan was the champion of the darker races. In practice, this movement ran counter to the real interests of the black masses and, in many cities, was an obstacle to the organization of struggle for immediate demands. A good example was in St. Louis, where leaders of the Pacific movement were active in attempting to defeat a strike of black and white nutpickers. The third tendency was the Liberian American Plan, which was a clearly bourgeois expression of Pan-Africanism. Under the guise of assistance to Liberia, their slogan was "Freedom for Liberia." It was a plan of the aspirant black bourgeoisie to participate in a comprador role in the colonial exploitation of Liberia. This can be seen in the statement of one of its leaders: "We are beating our hearts and souls trying to break through thick walls of prejudice which bar us from the highest brackets of big industry here in America, when there is a virgin field which we could develop in Africa." Basically saying, white people in America aren't letting us get rich so that we can exploit workers, whether they be black or white, when we could go to Africa and just basically rape the land there, is essentially what they're saying. The so-called plan to free Liberia carefully avoided any mention of the role of U.S. imperialism. Firestone owned huge rubber plantations in Liberia in the exploitation of the Liberian people. This plan received a large amount of publicity throughout the black-owned media. Its appeal to the impoverished black masses was mainly that a free Liberia could show the way to improving the conditions of colored folk throughout the world. The propaganda was aimed at the ghetto petty bourgeoisie. Themselves driven into poverty by the Depression. The movement found its own theoreticians to justify such a scheme, cloaking it in a pseudo-revolutionary terms designed to appeal to poverty-stricken blacks. Foremost amongst these theoreticians was the renegade George Padmore, apostate communist, whose numerous articles appeared throughout the black press. It is a credit to the party's correct strategy and tactics in the Black Freedom Front, along with our revolutionary line, that these tendencies remained as scattered local organizations, never able to unite nationally as Garvey's UNIA had. We knew that to maintain their credibility among the masses, these nationalists had in some way to struggle against the system. To this extent, we would unite with them in a principled way while criticizing their idealist schemes. Interesting. Interesting. So what they're saying is he just laid out all the crazy ideas that black folks had at the time. Black people need their own state in Illinois. We need to take over a part of Illinois and create a black state there. Black people need to move to Liberia to take over and become colonists in Liberia. Black people need to be united with Asian people as Japan as their leader. All sorts of crazy shit. And I believe what he's saying here is that the Communist Party said, all right, come on in, guys. Open the door to them. I don't know if I would have made that decision where I could, if I were to vote on a committee or if I were a part of any sort of decision-making body in the party. I don't know if I want those crazy folks around. But what he's saying here is that the party's strategy was to neutralize those groups. Anyway, Sulani Du Bois says, Liberia was an imperialist project. It was a black bourgeoisie backed by the white bourgeoisie. Absolutely facts. There's a great book that I was reading, and I lost it in Norway. There's a great book I was reading, The Stolen Wealth of Slavery. The Stolen Wealth of Slavery by Dave Montero, if I remember the author's name right. I was reading that book privately. I wasn't reading the book on live stream. Yeah, in that book, he talked about how basically the Back to Africa movement was explicitly funded by rich white capitalists in the North, right? For various reasons, various nefarious reasons, right? But yeah, it was never a popular movement amongst black folks, even the black masses. But anyway, going back to what I was saying here. Very interesting that the party would take this strategy of eating their competition rather than just keeping them at arm's length. All right, but anyway, our purpose in this was to better be in a position to lead the broad masses, many of whom, having genuine national aspirations, were temporarily taken in by these utopian escapist nationalists. Very interesting. Very interesting strategy. Though, I don't know if that's what I think is all the way best. But continuing here. By the way, shout out to Sulani Du Bois. We're going to be continuing reading here. Petty bourgeoisie nationalism in the party. From this account of the programs and activities of the various brands of utopian black nationalism, I address myself to the struggle against the ideological influences of these movements in the party. This was a touchy question. It was the first time this question had been dealt with in such a forthright manner. We had spoken much of white chauvinism, the main danger in our tasks in relation to it. There had been a considerable strengthening of this fight, but there was still much room for improvement. But little had been said about petty bourgeoisie nationalism within our own ranks. It was not surprising that the pressure of the growing wave of ghetto nationalism should find expression in the party. There was a tendency among some black comrades to surrender to the propaganda of the local nationalists. This was revealed in St. Louis in connection with the pro-Japanese movement and in Harlem in respect to the Jobs for Negroes campaign. After all, there was no Chinese wall between the party and the masses. Just as the ruling class ideology of white supremacy had its influences on white comrades, it was not unusual that black comrades would be similarly affected by petty bourgeoisie nationalist ideology. These moods and sentiments were expressed in feelings of distrust of white comrades, in skepticism about the possibility of winning white workers to active support in the struggle for black rights, and in the attitude that nothing could be accomplished until white chauvinism was completely eliminated. This latter was particularly dangerous because it failed to understand that white chauvinism could only be broken down in the process of struggle. But more than a mood or sentiment was the beginning of a theoretical rationale represented in the contention that even to raise the question of bourgeoisie nationalism would weaken the struggle against white supremacy. I denounced this dangerous counterposing of the fight against white chauvinism to the struggle against bourgeois nationalism. Of course, white chauvinism was the main danger, but communists could not be content with mere formula. As Stalin had said when dealing with a similar controversy concerning Great Russian chauvinism and local nationalism in the Soviet Union, it would be foolish to attempt to give ready-made recipes suitable for all times and for all conditions as regards the chief and the lesser danger. Such recipes do not exist. The chief danger is the deviation against which we have ceased to fight, thereby allowing it to grow into a danger to the state. The fact that white chauvinism was the main danger by no means implied that bourgeois nationalism, under certain conditions, could not become the main danger in a particular situation in the development of our work among blacks. No one could deny that this was the situation that developed in St. Louis and in Harlem. Our experience in these struggles showed that bourgeois nationalism, if not fought, could become the main obstacle to advancing our work among blacks. The struggle against white chauvinism and petty bourgeoisie nationalism went hand in hand. It was necessary to struggle on two fronts, for both deviated from the line of proletarian internationalism. Stalin correctly stated, if you want to keep both deviations under fire, then aim primarily against this source, against those who depart from internationalism. So basically, what Harry Haywood is trying to say, from my understanding here, is that within the Communist Party at this time, there is still a tendency, especially because this is taking place in America, this is the Communist Party of the United States of America, there's still white racism. There is still white supremacist thinking. There's still white chauvinism. And that is going to be the hardest hurdle to overcome for members even within the party. Even people that are well-trained, well-educated communists, it's not impossible for somebody to still have a bit of that racist thinking within them that says that whites are superior to blacks, right? And he's saying that this is the most important danger within the party, stopping it from being a fully revolutionary force. Of course, stupid nationalism, like saying, oh, the communists need to fight and form their own country within America. We need the Soviet Republic of Wisconsin, whatever, like stupid shit like that is going to exist. Yeah, that's something we should look out for. But really what's important is, like, if we're really going to tap into the different groups of people that are going to make the revolution happen, we cannot have any. Zero. We need zero tolerance for white chauvinism and white supremacy within the party, within the movement, right? That's what I'm getting from that section. Continuing here. I tried to hit home sharply to the delegates that the most dangerous forms of petty bourgeois nationalism in the party were not its open expressions, but rather its hidden forms. The clearest example was the case of Comrade Noel in Detroit. The Central Committee had definite information that Noel had become a center around which these tendencies in the party gravitated, and from whom comrades who erred in this direction found the greatest encouragement. Noel had spread veiled inferences that some black comrades who were carrying out the work of the party were Uncle Toms. That's a wild thing for a white man to say. That's a wild thing for a white man to say. To call a black man an Uncle Tom because he's working to overthrow capitalism and free your white ass as well as his. Y'all are crazy. Anyway, he had attempted to use all difficulties and shortcomings of the party to disrupt and to undermine morale, particularly among the newer comrades. I denounced Noel's activities, charging that they created an atmosphere in which stool pigeons and provocateurs could carry on their best work. I was now at the summation of my report. It was clear, I said, that the struggle against reformism in the black movement, including bourgeois and petty bourgeois nationalist influences, could go forward only on the basis of an all-around strengthening of our work among the black masses. The increased activities of the reformist leaders could only be met and defeated on the basis of the widest application of our united front tactics. This meant that we had to penetrate reformist-led mass organizations on the basis of immediate and specific demands of the black masses. Thus, we could draw the people into struggle over the heads of the treacherous reformist and bourgeois nationalist leaders. So basically saying we need to get the black masses first before the bourgeois does. Going down to the comments, Sulani Du Bois says unity or failure 100%. Absolutely. Unity and failure with all anti-racist. Unity with all anti-capitalist. Unity with all anti-racist and anti-capitalists only, is what I say. You might disagree with me on that, but you know what it is on my channel. Death to all white supremacists and death to all lynchers. Say that 2 times for the people in the back. This whole situation confronted us with the necessity of immediately strengthening the leadership of the proletariat and the party in the Black Liberation Movement. Black industrial workers were then, and remain today, the most powerful, resolute, and consistently revolutionary force in the black movement. It is only under their leadership and that of its communist vanguard that the Black United Front can maintain a consistently anti-imperialist character, unite with the multinational working class, and eventually overthrow imperialism. Such a strategy called for a radical improvement in our trade union and shop work. We had to energetically take up the struggle for the day-to-day demands of black workers in every struggle. This also had to be done by the unemployed councils. On this basis, we could immediately carry through energetic and sustained recruitment of black workers into our revolutionary trade unions, into the revolutionary opposition within the AFL. Simultaneously, it was necessary to carry through a bold policy of drawing the most militant elements among them into the leadership of the trade union and unemployed work. The whole question of developing cadres among blacks had to be more rapidly pushed forward in the party, as well as in the revolutionary mass organizations. This drive for the strengthening of our work among the basic sections of the black working class was connected with the intensification of the struggle along the whole front of black liberation. In this, we had to immediately push forward the campaign for black political rights against lynch terror and all forms of persecution, for the freedom of the Scottsboro Boys, Angelo Herndon, and others. I called for centering this campaign around the LSNR's Bill of Civil Rights for the Negro people. A mass petition drive for the bill was to have been immediately launched and connected with the development of mass actions in all localities. In the South, we had to strengthen our concentration work in the key industries: steel, coal, textile, and tobacco. We had to build up the party, revolutionary trade unions, and the opposition movement within the AFL on the basis of drawing black and white workers into joint struggle. Our demands should have focused on the needs of the masses, against the NRA differentials, discrimination, and increased fascist attacks upon the rights of black and white workers. Simultaneously, we had to take steps to strengthen the movement of sharecroppers and poor farmers against the cotton plow under the Bankhead Bill, against the whole system of semi-feudal slavery of the agrarian masses. So what he's talking about is real radical organizing, real radical strategy here. You know, putting the most radical people in positions in these trade unions that they're putting together for black workers all throughout the South. Very radical stuff right here. True revolutionary. It was necessary to further develop our revolutionary agrarian program, in the center of which must be the slogan of confiscation of the land of the big white landlords and capitalists in favor of the black and white tillers. Basically, an American version of kill the boer. Kill the boer. Rah, rah. Kill the boer. In all this work, it was necessary to bring forth more energetically our full program for black liberation. Equal rights, the right of self-determination, and confiscation of the land. Yes, I love it. Once again, it's so radical. It's so fucking radical, it gets you excited. Because it's something that you would only dream about in some, like, fiction. Suliani Du Bois says it takes effort, but that's the real work. Absolutely. What I'm gaining from this book, Suliani, and I want to thank you for joining, because it seems like, you know, that you're really turned up, and I really like your Avi. You know, red, black, and green with the hammer and sickle, that's hard. Look, reminds me of the Mozambican flag. I don't know if that's the Mozambique or the Angolan flag. Anyway, I gotta say, yes, we have to be really organized. We can't just be talking online. We can't just be reading books all day. We have to actually like organize. We have to join our unions, join our clubs, join our, organizations, you know what I'm saying, and get actually unionized with other revolutionaries and people. Not just doing commentary on YouTube all day, which is why I really don't, care that much about this channel's views and stuff like that. Why I just up here read and educate, because I got a real ass life that I live outside of this, and I have bigger plans for my future outside of just being a YouTuber. So you know what I mean? Like, we need to be doing more than just actually just talking about these things. We need to take pages, literally pages, from Harry Haywood's playbook, which is his autobiography, and study it and redo it. You get what I'm saying? Because this type of activity could still work today. Organizing black workers, putting people in unions, getting people really turned up, radicalized, educated, and class conscious. That could do a lot. Tea. Sulani Du Bois says, I made it myself, actually. It's fire. You should be a designer. When we start the communes, after we kill all the oligarchs, we're gonna start a section of the commune where you're just gonna produce cool ass logos and graphic tees and stitch on type of jackets, jean jackets and shit that we've confiscated from the fast fashion stores that we burnt down to the ground. Anyway, continuing here. In all this work, it was necessary to bring forth more energetically our full program for black liberation, equal rights, the right of self-determination, and confiscation of the land. We had to carry through the widest popularization of the achievements of the Soviet Union in the solution of the national question. Likewise, it was important not only to popularize the program of the Communist International for the black colonies in Africa and the West Indies, but to develop actions in support of the revolutionary movement in these colonies against imperialism. In building a united front from below with the masses of black toilers in the reformist-led organizations, we had to guard against any leftist distortion of our line, any tendency to lump the masses in these organizations together with their leaders. This would play directly into the hands of petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie misleaders, inevitably leading towards our isolation. On the contrary, it was absolutely necessary in our approach to these masses to make a clear distinction between them and their leaders. At the same time, we had to equally alert against the right opportunist tendency to underestimate the class role of black reformism. Such a tendency would lead to lagging at the tail of reformist and reactionary nationalist leaders, weakening proletarian hegemony and party leadership of the black liberation movement. So basically what they're saying is like they're doing everything they can to try to get the black grassroots and masses on their side. You get what I'm saying? Shout out to Kareth J up in the chat. Salute to Kareth J joining. And Solani Du Bois says, thanks. I was looking at the African struggle and American struggle and knew they were the same, just extended. All right, well, shout out to Solani Du Bois. Shout out to all the brothers and sisters in Africa. We are united in the fight against white supremacy and capitalist exploitation. So shout out to Solani Du Bois and everybody else who's tuning in as we continue to knock down Black Bolshevik. All right. By the way, we're only reading until chapter 17, and I believe we're going to end on page 441. We're on page 434 right now. So just letting everybody know the timeline on when we expect to finish this live stream. All right. An effective struggle against reformist leaders and the winning of the masses from their reactionary influence demanded once and for all that we seriously take up the task of building the LSNR into an independent mass organization around the party's program of struggle for black liberation. Only on the basis of building our work along these lines would we be able to weld that unbreakable unity of black and white toilers. My report lasted 2 hours and was considered a highlight of the convention. I received a standing ovation. By a motion of a delegate from Michigan, my report, The Road to Negro Liberation, was published in pamphlet form. I was later placed on the Politburo as a result of this speech. All right, shout out to Harry Haywood, making waves at the conference. So, looking back, Before the party could take the lead in the black liberation movement, it had to demonstrate in action to blacks that their deeply rooted distrust of white workers, nurtured by race riots and discrimination, and encouraged by established leaders, was an obstacle to united action in the crisis. The party was able to do this because it had a comprehensive program to deal with the crisis, and the other groups did not. In Scottsboro, the party effectively discredited the legalistic strategy of the NAACP, its reliance on courts, lawyers, and liberal politicians. It was in our day-to-day work in the northern ghettos, the unemployment demonstrations, the campaigns against evictions and police brutality, and in struggles to organize non-discriminatory unions that the party won hegemony over the local bourgeoisie nationalist organizations. Such movements were springing up at the time in Chicago, New York, Baltimore, St. Louis, Washington, and Detroit. These nationalist and separatist organizations exploited the antagonisms which inevitably developed between blacks and white immigrants in neighboring ghettos. This was further exacerbated by the presence of white immigrant shopkeepers in the black community. But the nationalists failed to take two factors into account. First, that the Depression was driving many of these white immigrant groups into desperation and moving them to the left. And second, that the party was waging a relentless struggle against white chauvinism in its own ranks and in the mass organizations it participated in. The unemployed councils, the TUUL unions, and the ILD, all active in the early Depression, enrolled large numbers of whites in struggle on the platform which proclaimed full equality for blacks and resistance to all forms of discrimination in employment, in distribution of relief, and in the courts. Moreover, the Scottsboro campaign demonstrated, as Adam Clayton Powell pointed out, that there were hundreds of thousands of white workers throughout the country and the world who would go to meetings and demonstrations and even get arrested to protect 8 black youth from illegal lynching. These actions helped to demonstrate that the white workers were willing, under party leadership, to struggle against their own chauvinism and support the special demands of the black liberation struggle. But equally important was the fact that the party's program was far more effective than that of the nationalists in winning relief for the black community in the face of unemployment and high rents. The nationalists struggled for the right to all jobs in the black community, but most blacks worked outside the ghetto. Even if the nationalists succeeded, the number of jobs they could win would only reach a fraction of the black unemployed. In contrast, the party's demonstrations, such as sit-ins at relief offices, won immediate relief for hundreds of thousands of unemployed blacks in cities throughout the country. In Birmingham, Richmond, New York, Chicago, and almost every major urban center. The party's mass demonstrations brought results, and along with our defense of black political prisoners and the struggle against white chauvinism, it won us the respect of the black masses throughout America. Large numbers of black workers and intellectuals were attracted to our ranks, and this needs to be done again. In my position as the head of the Negro Department, I tried to guide this two-pronged ideological struggle against bourgeois assimilationism on the one hand and petty bourgeois and bourgeoisie nationalism on the other. The success of this ideological struggle in the black community was dependent upon a relentless and continuous struggle against white chauvinism by white communists and effective practical mass work by the party in the North and the South. From 1930 to 1935, both of these conditions existed, and we became the single most effective and respected organization in the national black community. The Eighth Party Convention called for building the LSNR into a mass organization. We felt the need for a black-led revolutionary organization to counter the NAACP leaders who were attempting a comeback after Scottsboro. They wanted to divert the mass trend toward militant confrontation back into channels of reliance on capitalist courts and legislative bodies. Toward this end, they were trumpeting the Costigan-Wagner anti-lynch bill in an effort to regain their lost prestige. Not only did they seek to confine the struggle to legislative channels and bolster faith in the capitalist institutions, they sought support for a bill which in effect could be used as a weapon against the struggles of workers. Because eventually, we're going to have to lynch the bosses and the billionaires. So if we pass an anti-lynching bill, that's going to make it kind of hard for us to do what we need to do. Immediately upon my return to New York, we launched a campaign to rebuild the LSNR. We called a meeting of the National Council of the organization. At this meeting, Langston Hughes, who had recently returned from the Soviet Union, was elected president. I was elected national secretary, relieving Richard B. Moore, who was in ill health. Ben Davis Jr., just up from Atlanta, was made the editor of The Liberator, formerly the Harlem Liberator, which now became the official organ of the LSNR. Davis was replacing Maud White, who was sent to Cleveland as a party section organizer. Detroit Scottsboro. As a first step towards rebuilding the organization, I went on a speaking tour of Midwest industrial centers and addressed successful mass rallies in Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, and St. Louis. These rallies were sponsored by local LSNR groups, in some cases jointly with the International Labor Defense. The burning civil rights issue in these cities was police terror against the black community. One of the most glaring examples I encountered was in Detroit. There, the party and the LSNR chapter were in the midst of a campaign to defend James Victory, a black World War I veteran charged with robbery and assault with intent to murder a white woman. The situation was building up to a race riot. Detroit was a virtual company town of the auto magnates and allied business interests. I've never heard Detroit called a company town. That's hilarious. That's the best joke I've ever heard about Detroit. Detroit is just one big company town. It's the world's largest company town. That's hilarious. Though I think that title now goes to Orlando. I think Orlando is now the world's biggest company town. That's funny. Detroit was a virtual company town of the auto magnates and allied business interests. That's funny as hell. That's funny. I'm sorry. Anyway, they controlled the government, the police, and press. At the same time, the city was a key concentration of pro-fascist elements. Foremost among these were Detroit's own radio priest, Father Coughlin, and his followers. The Reverend Gerald L.K. Smith, one of Huey Long's chief lieutenants, had also settled in Detroit. Okay, is Huey Long considered bad? I know Huey Long is like, he's a liberal, he's a demagogue, etc., etc. But growing up in Louisiana, we kind of have love for Huey Long as much as you can for a white man at that time. You get what I'm saying? If Huey Long wasn't assassinated, Louisiana would have been the first state in the nation with high-speed rail. We would have at least 5 lines of high-speed rail. If Huey Long wasn't, I'm sorry, I'm gonna cape for Huey Long. I'm sorry. If he's talking about the Huey Long, the senator from Louisiana who tried to run for president and got assassinated or something like that, corrupt and crony, all that sort of stuff. If Huey Long won, Louisiana would have state-sponsored girlfriends for every incel. Louisiana would be the state with not only free health care, you get paid to go to the hospital. Louisiana would have higher education like Uber Eats, and it would be for free if Huey Long... I'm joking. I'm just saying, we would have fully automated luxury communism had Huey Long not been assassinated. I'm joking. That's just me repping Louisiana a bit. Let me just have my fun. Okay? Anyway, Detroit was also a Ku Klux Klan stronghold and the home base of the notorious Black Legion, a split-off from the KKK. These and various other local hate groups all engaged in fanning the flames of racial and national hatred among the city's polyglot labor force, consisting of Poles, the largest foreign-born element, a large contingent of Southern poor whites, and blacks. The frame-up of James Victory occurred in the midst of one of the most vicious campaigns of racist incitement in Detroit's history. It was launched by the police department under the leadership of Colonel Pickert, in conjunction with the employer-controlled press of the city. For 2 weeks, the news media, and especially the yellow sheet, the Detroit Times, carried on a vicious drive of slanderous race baiting in which blacks were depicted as natural rapists, voodooists, murderers, and all-around thugs who were conspiring to assault white women. The police department issued special instructions to arrest on sight blacks found in white neighborhoods. Colonel Pickert boasted that an average of 50 arrests a day were made. This frenzied manhunt finally culminated in the arrest and frame-up of James Victory, who was made a target for the whole campaign of lynch hysteria. The local LSNR and the ILD immediately came to the defense of Victory. When I arrived, they were in the process of building a United Front Defense Committee. From the outset, we saw that the tearing up of the innocent worker Victory had a twofold purpose. On the one hand, to intensify the oppression of blacks, and on the other, to divide and split the workers in this way to forestall the growing tide of working class struggle against the auto lords. The Defense Committee formulated demands which included an immediate end to the terror campaign and manhunt, immediate release of Victory, withdrawal of special police details from black neighborhoods, freedom of speech and movement for black people in all parts of the city, an end to discrimination in relief and on the job, and a call for united action of black and white toilers against the common oppressor. A series of meetings were called, resolutions and telegrams poured down on the city officials. A tremendous mass struggle developed to defend Victory. I spoke at a large mass rally held at the Israel Baptist Church along with Reverend Graham John Bolins of the Union Theological Seminary and William Weinstone, district organizer of the Communist Party. I remember comrades at this meeting and activists in the campaign included Joe Billups, head of the LSNR chapter, LeBron is an old name. I didn't know LeBron was an old name. I thought that was a 1980s, 1990s, teen mom name. Okay. LeBron Simmons, a young black law student, and his brother John. And Nat Gambley, trade union director for the party. In my speech, I placed the defense of James Victory in the context of the overall struggle for black rights, emphasizing that success could only be achieved through revolutionary mass struggle of black and white workers. I scored black reformists who stood aloof. I scored black reformists who stood aloof from the struggle and refused to say anything about the crying injustices and insults perpetrated against black people. The committee retained the famous labor attorney Maurice Sugar to defend James Victory. At the trial, Sugar made a brilliant and militant defense, breaking down the prosecution's lies and fabrications and exposing the flimsy character of the frame-up. The mass protests, combined with Sugar's legal defense, resulted in the freeing of James Victory. This important triumph was testimony to the need for mass struggle in defense of black rights and stood in sharp contrast to the reformist treachery of the NAACP leadership. I left Detroit in high spirits. My next stop was Chicago, where I addressed a mass meeting called by the American Consolidated Trades Council. The meeting was part of a campaign for employment of black construction workers on the DuSable High School building project. Chicago was followed by stops in St. Louis, Cleveland, and Kansas City. Following the tour, there was a short spurt of activity by LSNR chapters, but this soon petered out. Soon, the only active chapters left were in Harlem and the south side of Chicago. It was not long before it became clear to me that the LSNR as a national organization was dead and could not be revived. What had happened? Why had the LSNR never really gotten off the ground as a broad mass organization? Its failure was inevitable, inherent in the organizational structure and program of the LSNR as it had been conceived. Its founding conference in the fall of 1930 had adopted a program and manifesto which included the full program of the Communist Party on the Afro-American question, including the destruction of the plantation system, confiscation of land without compensation, and right of self-determination in the Black Belt. It had called for affiliation of other organizations to the LSNR on the basis of support for this complete program. The obvious result of these rigid demands was that no other groups would affiliate with the LSNR. LSNR branches of individual members were small, sectarian groups made up almost entirely of CP members and close sympathizers. Little effort was made to build the LSNR as a true united front body, organizing joint actions around immediate issues. Thus, the LSNR remained a small, isolated group. So basically what he's saying is, and if I remember right, it's the League for, Negro Rights or something like that, League or Society for Negro Rights, created by the Communist Party. It was too radical. and it was too. It couldn't work in collaboration with other groups that were fighting for black rights because it was too radical. Is how I'm breaking that down there. So you had to be fully on board with the idea of black people taking the white man's land. You know, the full Communist Party platform in relation to Negro rights and stuff like that. You had to be in full agreement with that. All right. All right. Hold on. Let me look that up. Just wanted to look something up for you. All right. No. I'm sure it's in the book somewhere. Is there a section in here, notes, index? Maybe we can find the definition here. Because I forgot what the LSNR exactly stood for. These are the notes for the chapters. Okay. I will look it up later. I don't want to take up all of y'all's time trying to look it up. But basically, yeah, the LSNR was an organization trying to organize black folks to work alongside the Communist Party. But unfortunately, it didn't get enough people to join from different organizations because it was so radical. You know what I mean? Maybe we can find it here. Hold on. Nope. All right. Anyway, we're going to continue here. Sorry. So these programmatic roadblocks were accompanied by problems of white chauvinism in the party. Within party circles, the LSNR became an excuse for failing to tackle head-on the Afro-American question and white chauvinism. Some even called the LSNR the Negro Party. This assumed the battle for black rights could be left to a black party, rather than being a priority for both whites and blacks within one party. I like how Harry lowercase whites and uppercase blacks. I don't know if I just now noticed that, or if that's the first time he did it, but that's dope. That's dope. He lowercase whites and uppercase blacks. That's what we do. I love it. I love it. So there was a tendency to defer questions in the field of the LSNR, and this became a cover for a white chauvinistic underestimation of the Afro-American question. It allowed many comrades to neatly sidestep dealing with white chauvinism and the revolutionary importance of the black struggle. In this sense, the LSNR actually became an obstacle to the mobilization of the entire party for Afro-American work. For all these reasons, the LSNR did not become the mass organization as it was originally conceived. It remained essentially a paper organization, and all our belated attempts to revive it were failures. The LSNR as a national organization ceased to exist. The last issue of The Liberator appeared at the end of 1934. A few branches, those clearly associated with local issues, survived. In 1936, the LSNR was superseded by the National Negro Congress, a genuine United Front organization of which I will speak in later chapters. Interesting. All right, so here we go to chapter 17, Chicago Against War and Fascism. We're going to pick up on this next time when we read. So we're going to wrap up right here. I want to give a shout out to everybody who joined the live stream chat. Shout out to Suliani Du Bois. This will be the last comment I read. Suliani says, post-civil rights may have transformed the basis of the black belt thesis to require a new analysis. Yeah, I think, of course, a new analysis or a new strategy of black self-determination definitely should be drawn up and derived. But I think it should, once again, it should be based on a popular movement or a popular mood or a popular desire for the people. As a person who has been a black American for all 34 years of my life, and I probably won't change until the day I die, I have not seen it or heard it be popularly espoused that black people need their own country in the deep south of America. Number one, geographically, come on now, the deep south kind of sucks. If we are going to have the right to self-determination, can we at least get to pick the best part of the country, which without a doubt is either the Pacific Northwest or New England? Come on now. Why do we have to be relegated to hot-ass, mosquito-ridden, car-centric Mississippi and Kentucky? The South sucks. I would not wish the dirty South on my worst enemy. You get what I'm saying? Why do we have to? I'm joking. I'm ranting. But Giuliani, Du Bois, you made a good point. It does have to be popular to be possible. Yes, it does have to be popular to be possible. I do agree with that. I agree with that. It has to be popular with the people. All right. But shout out to Giuliani, Du Bois. Shout out to Kareth J. And shout out to everybody who's going to watch this in the playback, who is going to, listen to this book. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I did my job well of bringing you this this wonderful text, and you're gaining something from it. And let me know what you think of this in the comment section. Y'all be easy out